At first glance, these ancient ruins might just look like piles of old stone, the kind of thing you'd expect to see crumbling in the background of history. But they're not what you think. Some of these sites defy everything we've been taught about human civilization. Stones heavier than modern cranes can lift, maps that show continents long before satellites existed, and temples built thousands of years before humans were supposed to know how to build anything at all. So who really built them? How did they do it without the technology we take for granted today? And most importantly, what else is still hidden, waiting to be uncovered? Today, we're diving deep into some of the world's most baffling mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about the past. If these structures and artifacts aren't what we think they are, then our entire timeline of history starts to fall apart. Because if a map shows Antarctica before it was covered in ice, that means somebody was sailing the oceans long before we ever gave them credit. If a temple was built 12,000 years ago, that means simple hunter-gatherers were capable of advanced architecture. And if stones weighing hundreds of tons were moved without modern machines, then maybe ancient people had knowledge we've completely lost. The scary part? If they could do this thousands of years ago, what else might they have been capable of? Things that never made it into the history books at all. Let's start with one of the strangest places on Earth, Baalbek in Lebanon. At first glance, it looks like another set of ruins, worn down by centuries of weather and time. But hidden in these ruins are stones so massive they make modern skyscraper. Foundations look tiny, some weigh over 1,000 tons, heavier than modern cranes can lift. Archaeologists say they were carved by the Romans and used as a foundation for temples. Sounds reasonable until you realize there's no clear record of how they were ever moved. The Romans had incredible engineering, sure, but no technology that could drag blocks the size of apartment buildings across uneven terrain. So was it really just Roman ingenuity, or did they inherit something even older, built by people with knowledge we've forgotten? If these stones could be moved thousands of years ago, what else might have been possible back then? Now jump to a very different mystery, the Piri Reis map. It looks like just another old map drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. But study it closely and it reveals something that shouldn't exist, a detailed outline of Antarctica without ice. Mainstream historians argue the coastlines could have been mistakes or copied from earlier charts of South America. But the level of accuracy suggests the mapmaker had access to knowledge we didn't officially have until satellites were in space. So either ancient sailors had technology we can't explain, or the story of human exploration is much older and more advanced than we've ever admitted. If people back then could map Antarctica with precision, what other lost skills might they have mastered? Then there's Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, an archaeological site that rewrites the timeline of human civilization. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles, decorated with intricate carvings, all dating back 12,000 years. According to the history books, humans at that time were still hunter-gatherers, barely surviving, not organizing complex societies or building temples. Archaeologists explain it as a strange anomaly, an early experiment in religion and community, but that doesn't add up. The sheer scale, the artistry, the astronomical alignments, it's all far too advanced for primitive tribes. Could this mean there was once a lost civilization, wiped out by a catastrophe, leaving only fragments behind? If hunter-gatherers built this, then maybe we've underestimated them entirely. Or maybe we've missed the bigger story of who else was alive back then. In Hungary lies another puzzle, the Rohan Codex. At first glance, it looks like just an old book, faded ink on yellowed pages. But open it up and you're met with text written in a completely unknown script, with hundreds of illustrations of battles, religious scenes, and strange symbols. Scholars have spent centuries trying to decode it, some claiming it's a lost language, others saying it's an elaborate hoax. The problem is, it's too detailed to be a joke. The illustrations don't match any known religion or culture, and the writing doesn't fit neatly into any linguistic pattern. So if it's not fake, then who wrote it? And why does it read like the surviving memory of a culture we know nothing about? And then there's the story of the White Pyramid of China. Unlike Egypt's pyramids, you won't see photos of this one in textbooks. The first reports came from pilots flying over China during the 20th century, who swore they saw massive white pyramids hidden in the countryside. Some later researchers claimed to have photographs, but official Chinese records remain strangely silent. The explanation: authorities say they're just burial mounds of ancient emperors. Yet, if they're really so ordinary, why restrict access and suppress information for decades? Could it be that they hold something inconvenient for the accepted story of history, something that doesn't fit with what we're told? And if so, what's really buried beneath their walls? In the Chinese province of Zhejiang, a group of farmers stumbled on something just as baffling: the Longyu Caves. At first they thought they'd found ordinary ponds, but when the water was drained, what appeared wasn't natural at all. It was a massive system of hand-carved caverns, with perfectly chiseled walls and patterns carved into the stone. The strangest part? There's no record of who built them, when, or why. Ancient China kept meticulous historical records, yet nothing mentions the construction of these caves. Mainstream theories say they could have been underground storage or shelters. But why hide something on this scale and then erase it from history entirely? If people thousands of years ago were capable of this, what else did they build that we've lost forever? And then we have the infamous Black Sarcophagus of Alexandria. In 2018, archaeologists unearthed a massive sealed coffin in Egypt. The rumors started immediately. Could this be the tomb of Alexander the Great? Would it contain treasures, secrets, maybe even a curse? When it was finally opened, the truth was stranger than fiction. 3 skeletons floating in a foul red liquid. No inscriptions, no names, nothing to identify who they were. Officially, they were just unknown elites of their time. But if this was meant to be an important burial, why no markings? Why seal them away in something so foreboding? Was this a forgotten piece of Egypt's history, or something deliberately hidden because it raised more questions than answers? Finally, one of the most famous enigmas of all, the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in a shipwreck off the coast of Greece, it looks like a lump of corroded bronze at first. But when cleaned and studied, it revealed an intricate system of gears, cogs, and mechanisms, essentially a 2,000-year-old computer. It could track the movements of the planets, predict eclipses, and calculate cycles with unbelievable accuracy. Mainstream historians call it an isolated marvel, a freak invention far ahead of its time. But how does a single genius invent something so advanced in a world where technology was supposedly centuries behind? Either this wasn't an isolated case at all, or it's evidence that advanced knowledge existed, then was lost. And if that's true, what other inventions have we missed? Things that could change everything we think we know about the ancient world. When you first arrive at Baalbek, tucked away in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, it doesn't seem all that different from other ancient ruins. You see columns, broken walls, and fragments of temples that look like the leftovers of another forgotten civilization. At a glance, it could pass for just another Roman site, maybe a little bigger, maybe a little older, but still in the same league as others, scattered across Europe and the Middle East. That's what most people think, until they get closer, because Baalbek isn't just old, it's impossible. Hidden beneath the recognizable ruins of Roman temples lies something that defies explanation. Stone blocks so massive they make the pyramids look small in comparison. We're not talking about a few tons of limestone here. Some of these blocks weigh over 1,000 tons each. To put that into perspective, that's heavier than a fully loaded jumbo jet. Imagine a single stone, the size of a house, carved with precision and somehow moved into place without the help of cranes, trucks, or modern machinery. That's Baalbek. The largest of these stones has been nicknamed the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, and it weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. That's not just big, it's mind-bending. And here's the strangest part. This wasn't a one-off. There are several blocks of similar size scattered around the site, some stacked neatly into foundations, others left abandoned in nearby quarries. It's as if whoever was building Baalbek had mastered the art of moving mountains, only to suddenly stop and leave their work unfinished. So, how did they do it? The mainstream explanation goes like this. The Romans built it. After all, Baalbek was known in Roman times as Heliopolis, the city of the sun. They constructed massive temples there, dedicated to gods like Jupiter and Bacchus. Roman engineering was legendary. Roads, aqueducts, amphitheaters. They built structures that still stand today, so it makes sense to credit them with Baalbek too, at least on the surface. But here's the problem. Roman engineering, as advanced as it was, never documented the use of blocks this big anywhere else. The largest stones they regularly used were a fraction of the size of Baalbek's megaliths. In fact, modern cranes today would struggle to move something that weighs over 1,000 tons, let alone transport it across uneven ground and lift it several feet into a foundation. And yet, at Baalbek it was somehow done, centuries before modern technology even existed. That's where the mystery starts to unfold. Because if the Romans built Baalbek, why did they suddenly decide to use stones 10 times larger than anything they had ever used before? And why here, in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, so far from the heart of the empire? Archaeologists argue that maybe they just wanted to show off, flex their engineering skills, build something so impressive it would stand for eternity. But that explanation falls apart when you realize we still don't know how they could have moved these blocks in the first place. Showmanship doesn't mean much if you don't have the tools to pull it off, and so the theories begin. Some researchers suggest the Romans may not have been the first to build at Baalbek. They argue that the site is much older and that the Romans simply built on top of what was already there. The giant stone blocks, the trilithon at the base of the Temple of Jupiter, may have belonged to a far more ancient civilization, one whose techniques for quarrying, moving, and placing massive stones have been lost to time. In other words, the Romans didn't build Baalbek from scratch, they inherited it. But if that's true, then who built it? That question opens a Pandora's box of possibilities. Some say it was the work of a forgotten advanced civilization, one that predates recorded history. A society capable of engineering feats we can't replicate today, wiped out by some global catastrophe, leaving behind only scattered evidence like the stones of Baalbek. Others take the theories even further, pointing to ancient myths and legends that describe the site as a place visited by gods. In fact, local folklore claims that Baalbek was originally constructed by giants under the orders of King Solomon, or even as a landing pad for the gods themselves. It sounds fantastical, almost ridiculous, until you stand in front of a stone, weighing 1,200 tons, and ask yourself how ordinary humans could have possibly moved it with ropes and wooden rollers. That's when the line between myth and reality starts to blur. Engineers who have studied Baalbek admit that the logistics don't add up. To move a stone of that size, you'd need thousands of men working in perfect coordination, pulling with ropes that wouldn't snap under the strain, on surfaces that wouldn't collapse under the weight. You'd also need a way to lift or slide the blocks into place once they reach the construction site. The problem is, no such technology has been recorded in Roman times, or in any time we know of. Some modern experiments have tried to replicate the feat on a smaller scale. Researchers have shown that with enough manpower, it's possible to move large stones using wooden sledges, levers, and clever engineering tricks. But scaling that up to Baalbek size, that's where everything breaks down. The sheer weight of the stones makes the methods unworkable. Ropes snap, rollers splinter, ground collapses. What works for a 50-ton block doesn't work for one weighing over 1,000 tons. So if not Romans, then who and how? That's where alternative theories start pointing toward lost technology, methods of construction that were once known but are now forgotten. Some speculate about advanced knowledge of physics and mechanics, tools that could cut and transport massive stones with precision. Others go even further, suggesting the use of sound, vibration, or even anti-gravity techniques. Concepts that sound like science fiction, but that keep resurfacing whenever ancient structures appear too advanced for their time. The darker twist is this. Maybe Baalbek isn't just about ancient skill. Maybe it's evidence of something far bigger, something humanity has chosen to forget. Because if there really was a civilization before us capable of this kind of engineering, it means history as we know it isn't just incomplete, it's wrong. Entire chapters may have been erased, whether by time, disaster, or deliberate choice. And that leaves us staring at Baalbek stones, wondering, if they could move these blocks thousands of years ago, what else might they have been capable of? The unanswered questions around Baalbek only deepen when you look at the quarry itself. About half a kilometer away from the main site lies something even more astonishing, an enormous stone block still attached to the bedrock. It's larger than the stone of the pregnant woman, estimated to weigh around 1,650 tons. That's nearly double the weight of the heaviest stones at Stonehenge. And even more mind-bending. In 2014, another block was found beneath it, measuring over 19 meters in length and weighing close to 1,800 tons. Think about that. A single stone so massive that even our best modern cranes would strain to move it. Yet here it is, cut with precision, as if it was meant to be transported and placed like any other building material. But for some reason it wasn't finished. It remains locked in the quarry, as if construction suddenly stopped. Why would ancient builders attempt something so ambitious only to abandon it halfway? Mainstream archaeologists suggest practical reasons. Maybe the stone cracked during carving. Maybe the builders realized it was too heavy to move. But if that's the case, why were other, nearly as massive stones successfully transported and fitted into Baalbek's foundations? Were the builders experimenting, pushing the limits of what they could achieve, or were they following some blueprint we no longer understand? And this brings us to a chilling thought. What if Baalbek wasn't just a temple site, but part of something larger, something with a purpose that went far beyond religion? The Romans, of course, saw it as a sacred space. They built temples to Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus, trying to impress their gods with sheer scale. But the foundations, the megalithic platform upon which these temples stand, feel older. They don't match Roman construction style. They don't fit the logic of Roman engineering. Instead, they look like something inherited, something reused, a foundation so solid and immovable that the Romans simply built on top of it, never questioning where it came from. This idea that the Romans were recyclers, not originators, fits with patterns we've seen in other parts of the world. At sites like Cusco in Peru, Incan walls sit on top of much older megalithic foundations. In Egypt, massive stone structures seem older than the temples built around them. And at Baalbek, the same story may be playing out. So who left these colossal blocks behind? One theory links Baalbek to the age-old stories of giants. Ancient texts and legends from the region describe enormous beings who once walked the earth, building monuments that ordinary humans could never replicate. In the Book of Enoch and other apocryphal writings, giants are often associated with forbidden knowledge, secrets passed down from the gods themselves. Could Baalbek be one of their works, a lingering scar of a time when humanity wasn't alone in its engineering feats? Others push the theory in a different direction. extraterrestrials. According to some fringe researchers, the sheer scale of Baalbek suggests it wasn't meant for humans at all. The massive stone platform, they argue, could have served as a landing pad for ancient spacecraft. After all, what else would require a perfectly flat, incredibly durable foundation made of blocks the size of small buildings? It's an idea that sounds like pure science fiction, until you realize we still don't have a better explanation for why those stones exist in the first place. Of course, mainstream archaeologists dismiss these claims as fantasy. They argue that with enough manpower, ingenuity, and time, ancient builders could achieve feats that seem impossible today. But notice the key word there: could. They don't actually demonstrate how. They don't show us ropes, pulleys, or cranes capable of lifting a 1,000-ton stone. They don't replicate the process. They just assume it was possible because it had to be. That's the weakness of the conventional story. It relies on faith, not proof. And that brings us back to the darker reality. Because if Baalbek's megaliths weren't built by Romans, and if no existing ancient civilization had the tools to move them, then history as we know it has a gaping hole in it. Something is missing, a lost chapter. The sheer audacity of Baalbek forces us to reimagine the past. If ancient people, whether human, giant, or something else, could move stones weighing nearly 2,000 tons, what else might they have been capable of? Could they have crossed oceans long before Columbus? Could they have mapped the world long before satellites? Could they have harnessed forces of nature we don't even understand today? And maybe the scariest question of all: why was that knowledge lost? Did a global catastrophe wipe them out, leaving only fragments behind? Did later civilizations deliberately erase the truth, rewriting history to make themselves look like the pinnacle of progress? Or is it possible that the answers are still out there, hidden beneath layers of earth waiting to be uncovered? Every time you stand in front of Baalbek stones, the same thought echoes in your mind. These blocks shouldn't exist. Not here, not at this time, not with the tools people supposedly had. And yet they do. Immovable, undeniable, staring back at us across thousands of years like a riddle carved in stone. So we're left with a haunting possibility. Maybe Baalbek isn't just an ancient ruin. Maybe it's a reminder that our past is far stranger, far more advanced, and far more mysterious than we dare to admit. And if they could move these stones, then what else might they have been capable of? The Piri Reis map. When you think about maps, you probably imagine something pretty straightforward. They tell us where things are, help us navigate, and at least in modern times, they're usually pretty accurate. But every once in a while, a map shows up that doesn't just guide us from point A to point B. It challenges everything we think we know about history. Enter the Piri Reis map, a centuries-old chart drawn on gazelle skin in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, it looks like just another early modern attempt at world cartography, full of weird shapes. Half-formed continents and squiggly coastlines. That wouldn't be unusual. Maps from the age of exploration were often wildly distorted compared to the clean precision of modern globes. But here's the problem. The Piri Reis map isn't just a little off. It shows things it absolutely shouldn't. Most famously, in the southern portion of the map, you can make out a landmass that looks suspiciously like Antarctica. Now that alone might not seem like a big deal, except for one detail. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, 300 years after Piri Reis drew his map. And even stranger, the part of Antarctica that appears on the map looks ice-free. Smooth coastlines, detailed contours, things you wouldn't expect to see if someone had just been guessing. Today, Antarctica is buried under miles of ice, and yet the Piri Reis map seems to capture what lies beneath, as if the cartographer had access to some knowledge long since lost. That's where the mystery begins. So, what's the mainstream explanation? Historians argue that Piri Reis wasn't mapping the world himself. He was compiling information from other sources. In fact, he admitted it. He claimed his map was pieced together from around 20 earlier charts, some of which dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. So what we're looking at isn't just a 16th century map, but potentially a window into much older geographic knowledge. The problem is, none of the known maps from antiquity show Antarctica. Greeks and Romans barely ventured beyond Europe, the Mediterranean, and parts of Asia and Africa. So where did this southern landmass come from? Scholars who defend the mainstream view argue that Piri Reis was simply misinterpreting South America, maybe stretching its coastline too far east and south. In other words, what looks like Antarctica might just be a cartographic mistake, the kind of error you'd expect from a time when the world was only half explored. But here's where things get tricky. Studies comparing the coastline on the Piri Reis map with modern reconstructions of Antarctica's ice-free shorelines suggest a striking similarity. How could a 16th century admiral, drawing on ancient sources, have depicted something we only confirmed with seismic surveys in the 20th century? That's not just a small mistake. It's a leap that shouldn't be possible, and so the doubts creep in. What if Piri Reis really did have access to maps far older than we realize? Maps created by a civilization capable of global exploration. Long before Columbus, long before the age of discovery, maybe even long before recorded history itself. That's the idea that has kept the Piri Reis map at the center of debates for decades. Alternative theories abound. Some suggest that ancient seafarers, perhaps the Phoenicians or even more mysterious groups, circumnavigated the globe and recorded coastlines we thought were unknown to them. Others go further, arguing that the map is evidence of a lost civilization, one capable of advanced navigation and cartography thousands of years before anyone else. It sounds far-fetched until you realize how many anomalies in world history point in the same direction. Massive megaliths like Baalbek, impossible stonework in Peru, myths of global floods and forgotten empires. Could the Piri Reis map be yet another fragment of that missing chapter in human history? Skeptics, of course, roll their eyes. They insist the Antarctica connection is pure coincidence, that the map is just a sloppy attempt at sketching South America. But even they struggle to explain why the southern coastline on the Piri Reis map doesn't match South America as we know it. Why does it curve the way Antarctica's coast does? Why does it appear more detailed than areas Europeans had actually explored by 1513? And then there's the nagging issue of scale. Many sections of the Piri Reis map are surprisingly accurate for the time, particularly parts of the western coast of Africa and eastern South America. This level of precision suggests that whoever made the source maps had advanced knowledge of latitude and longitude, a system that wasn't mastered until centuries later. How could this be possible unless the cartographers were using tools or methods far beyond what we typically credit to ancient seafarers? That's where the darker twist comes in. Because if the Piri Reis map is genuine evidence of Antarctica, drawn without ice, that means someone, some civilization saw it that way, which would place the map's original source thousands of years ago, before Antarctica froze over, possibly as far back as 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. That timeline throws a wrench into everything we think we know. According to mainstream history, civilization at that time was still in its infancy. Small farming communities, scattered hunter-gatherer groups, nothing close to the seafaring sophistication needed to map continents. So either history is wrong, or we've stumbled onto a coincidence so staggering it defies belief, and this leads us to a question no one likes to confront. If they had the ability to map Antarctica before it was covered in ice, then what else might they have been capable of? If we take the Antarctica claim at face value, the implications are staggering, because it wouldn't just mean that some ancient civilization reached the frozen continent, it would mean they did so before it froze. Scientists estimate that Antarctica has been covered by ice for thousands of years. The last time its coasts were relatively ice-free was at least 6,000 years ago, possibly longer. If someone charted those coastlines back then, it forces us to completely rewrite human history. Mainstream archaeology insists that 6,000 years ago, humanity wasn't capable of such feats. There were no great empires, no advanced tools for global navigation. The Egyptians hadn't built the pyramids yet. Stonehenge wasn't standing. The idea that people were sailing to Antarctica and making accurate maps of its coastline sounds impossible. And yet there it is, ink on gazelle skin, staring back at us across the centuries. Of course, critics argue that the Antarctica theory is overblown. Some say the southern landmass doesn't look like Antarctica at all. It's just a distorted version of South America. After all, mapmakers of the time often stretched and twisted continents to fill blank spaces. Others point out that Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map explaining his sources, charts from Portuguese explorers, Arab sailors, and possibly even Columbus himself. Maybe the mystery land is just a misunderstanding, the result of mixing all these maps together. But here's the problem. None of those sources should have had the level of detail that the Piri Reis map shows. Certain coastlines like Brazil are remarkably accurate, far more than you'd expect for the early 1500s. That suggests that some of his source maps were based on advanced surveying methods, ones involving precise latitude measurements. Yet, the technology to measure longitude with accuracy wasn't officially mastered until the 18th century. So how could these details appear on a 16th century map unless Reis was indeed working with material far older and far more advanced than anything known at the time? This is where alternative theories start to sound less like fantasy and more like necessary explanations. One idea is that a maritime civilization existed thousands of years ago, traveling the globe and charting coastlines, only to vanish without a trace. Maybe they were wiped out by a global catastrophe, like the flooding events at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. Rising sea levels could have swallowed their cities, leaving nothing behind but fragments of knowledge, passed down secretly through the ages until they reached Piri Reis. Another theory is even more controversial, that the knowledge was deliberately hidden, kept alive by secret societies or custodians of ancient wisdom. If that sounds far-fetched, remember that ancient texts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and India often describe advanced knowledge being handed down from the gods or the Watchers. Could those be poetic references to an earlier civilization or even to something not entirely human? Some researchers even flirt with the extraterrestrial angle. If the Piri Reis map shows Antarctica as it was thousands of years ago, then maybe it wasn't human hands that mapped it. Perhaps it was visitors from elsewhere, sharing knowledge that was incomprehensible at the time, later copied and recopied until it ended up in Reis's hands. To skeptics, that sounds absurd. But then again, so does a 16th century map showing an ice-free Antarctica. What's equally interesting is what the map leaves out. Much of the world is blank, unfinished, or distorted. It's not a polished atlas, it's a fragment. And fragments can sometimes be more telling than complete stories. They hint at missing pieces, at gaps in the puzzle we've yet to fill in. Could the Piri Reis map be just one surviving shard of a much larger tradition of ancient cartography? Maps now lost to time, destroyed in wars, or simply forgotten in dusty archives? The deeper you go, the more unsettling it becomes. Because if such maps existed, they imply a level of global connectedness that history books deny. They suggest people were crossing oceans thousands of years before Columbus, charting lands that wouldn't be discovered until much later. And if they could do that, then what else might they have achieved? Advanced architecture? Long distance? Trade networks? A scientific understanding of the Earth that rivals our own? The mainstream response is to shrug it off as coincidence, to insist that early explorers just got lucky, or that Piri Reis accidentally sketched something that looks like Antarctica. But that feels like a weak defense, especially when you consider how often these coincidences pile up across history. Baalbek's stones that shouldn't have been moved, Machu Picchu's walls that shouldn't have been carved, flood myths from every corner of the globe that shouldn't all sound the same. At some point, coincidence starts to look a lot like cover story, and this is where the Piri Reis map transforms from a quirky old artifact into something much darker. Because if it is genuine evidence of lost knowledge, then it means our history has been censored, not just by time, but perhaps by intent. Someone, somewhere, knew more than we give them credit for. And instead of passing that knowledge forward, it was buried, fragmented, and disguised until only hints remained. So what are we really looking at when we stare at the Piri Reis map? Is it just a sloppy 16th century mashup of half-understood charts filled with errors and misinterpretations? Or is it a window into something much older? An echo of a lost civilization, a record of a world we barely remember? The truth is, we don't know. And maybe that's the point, because whether it's a cartographic error or an ancient memory preserved against all odds, the Piri Reis map reminds us that history is fragile, that our understanding of the past is only as strong as the evidence we have. And sometimes that evidence doesn't just raise questions, it shatters the answers we thought were certain. So the next time you see an old map, filled with odd shapes and unfamiliar coastlines, ask yourself, is this just a mistake, or is it a clue? Because when it comes to the Piri Reis map, the line between error and revelation is razor thin. And if it truly does preserve echoes of a lost civilization, then maybe the question isn't whether history is wrong, but how much of it we've already forgotten. Göbekli Tepe. When we think about the beginnings of civilization, we usually picture farming villages slowly turning into towns, then cities, and finally, the rise of temples and monumental architecture. Agriculture comes first, then religion, then society as we know it. That's the neat timeline we're taught. But what if that timeline is backward? In the dusty hills of southeastern Turkey, an excavation has been forcing historians to reconsider everything. It's called Göbekli Tepe, and on the surface it doesn't look like much, just a series of low mounds stretching across a plateau. But when archaeologists started digging in the 1990s, they realized they weren't looking at a hill. They were uncovering the world's oldest known temple complex. Dating back nearly 12,000 years, Göbekli Tepe predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000. That alone would be impressive, but the details are what make it truly shocking. Massive stone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in perfect circles. Elaborate carvings of animals, lions, snakes, vultures, etched into the stone. Pillars shaped like stylized human figures, complete with arms and hands folded across their bellies. This was no random pile of rocks. It was intentional, symbolic, and breathtakingly sophisticated. And here's the twist. According to everything we thought we knew, this site should not exist. Mainstream archaeology tells us that in 9600 BCE, humanity was still made up of small, scattered groups of hunter-gatherers. No permanent settlements, no agriculture, no organized religion. The very idea of people coming together in large groups to build monumental architecture seems impossible. Without farming, how could they feed the workers? Without writing, how could they coordinate construction? Without cities, why would they even need such a place? Yet Göbekli Tepe proves that they did. The standard explanation is that hunter-gatherers must have banded together for ritual gatherings, slowly learning the skills of construction as they went. In this view, Göbekli Tepe becomes a kind of missing link, the birthplace of organized religion and social cooperation, which in turn sparked the agricultural revolution. In other words, maybe temples didn't come after farming. Maybe farming came because of temples. But as neat as that sounds, the deeper you look, the more the mainstream narrative starts to unravel. Take the engineering, for example. The pillars at Göbekli Tepe weren't just dragged out of the ground and plopped into place. They were carefully quarried from limestone bedrock, transported, and then erected into perfectly aligned circles. Some pillars are over 16 feet tall, weighing as much as a small truck. Even with modern tools, that's no small feat. But hunter-gatherers with stone hammers and wooden levers, that strains belief. Then there's the artistry. The carvings aren't crude or clumsy. They're detailed, symbolic, and strikingly consistent. Whoever made them wasn't experimenting. They were working within a system of meaning, a shared symbolic language that suggests a level of culture we're not supposed to see until thousands of years later. And then there's the site itself. Excavations have revealed only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe, but ground-penetrating radar suggests there are dozens more circles still buried beneath the earth. This wasn't a one-off monument. It was a sprawling complex, used for centuries, maybe even millennia. So how do we reconcile this with the official story of prehistory? Some archaeologists bite the bullet and admit that our timeline might need adjusting. Maybe human civilization didn't begin around 4,000, 5,000 BCE, as we thought, but thousands of years earlier. Maybe groups we considered primitive were far more advanced than we realized. Others suggest a more dramatic explanation. Could Göbekli Tepe be the legacy of a forgotten civilization, one that existed before the end of the last ice age, wiped out by a global cataclysm like the Younger Dryas event around 2800 BCE? That event, triggered possibly by a comet impact, is known to have caused massive climate shifts, flooding, and widespread extinctions. If there was an advanced culture before then, it might have been destroyed, leaving only scattered survivors. To carry fragments of knowledge into the future, Göbekli Tepe could be one of those fragments. And the mysteries don't stop there. Some researchers believe the site wasn't just a temple, it might have been an observatory. Certain alignments of the pillars seem to match the positions of stars and constellations as they appeared in the sky thousands of years ago. The carvings of animals, too, might represent constellations, an ancient star map preserved in stone. If true, that would mean Göbekli Tepe isn't just the world's first temple. It's also the world's first astronomical observatory. Mainstream scholars hesitate to go that far, but even they admit the symbolism is rich and layered. The vultures carved into the stones, for instance, are thought to represent death rituals, possibly an early form of sky burial. Other carvings seem to depict mythological scenes, hinting at a complex spiritual worldview. But here's the dark twist. If people were capable of building Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago, then our entire story of human history is incomplete. Civilization didn't just appear suddenly in Mesopotamia, as we like to think. It has deeper roots we've barely begun to uncover. And if one site like Göbekli Tepe could survive, buried under the earth for millennia, how many others might still be waiting to be found? Because if they could build this before farming, before cities, before writing, what else might they have been capable of? One of the most unsettling aspects of Göbekli Tepe is not just that it exists, it's that it was deliberately buried. Around 8000 BCE, after standing for over 1,000 years, the site was carefully backfilled with tons of soil, stone, and debris. It wasn't simply abandoned and left to crumble, it was entombed. Why would anyone do that? The mainstream answer is pragmatic. Maybe the site lost its importance and locals repurposed it as a garbage dump. But the sheer volume of material suggests intentional burial. It's as if whoever controlled Göbekli Tepe didn't want it to be used again. Some researchers suggest it could have been a ritual closure, an act of reverence, but others whisper a darker possibility, that knowledge contained within the site was meant to be hidden from future generations. If that's true, then Göbekli Tepe isn't just a window into the past. It's a message, buried on purpose. A time capsule from a forgotten age, and what a message it is. Let's consider the carvings in more detail. Among the many animals, scorpions, snakes, wild boars, there's one particular panel that has caused enormous debate, the so-called vulture stone. It shows a vulture holding a sphere, a headless human figure, and several abstract symbols. To mainstream archaeologists, it's a ritual scene, maybe tied to death and rebirth, but others, especially those who study archaeoastronomy, see something much stranger. They believe the carvings represent constellations and that the sphere is a comet. If true, the panel may be a record of the Younger Dryas impact event, the catastrophic period around 10,800 BCE when something, possibly a comet, triggered a sudden return to Ice Age conditions. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe recorded that event, it would mean they not only witnessed it, but encoded it in symbolic form, preserving it for future generations. That suggests not just awareness of the sky, but a sophisticated understanding of cosmic events. Again, this doesn't fit the narrative of primitive hunter-gatherers. These people weren't supposed to have astronomy, complex symbolism, or monumental architecture. Yet at Göbekli Tepe, all three converge. And here's another puzzle. How did the knowledge encoded at Göbekli Tepe survive the chaos of the Ice Age? If humanity was truly scattered in small, struggling bands, how could such complex cultural memory be preserved? Some suggest it points to cultural continuity, that survivors of a lost civilization passed down fragments of advanced knowledge, which eventually resurfaced here in stone. This theory isn't just speculation. In myths from cultures around the world, there are recurring stories of great floods, skyfire, and gods or sages who arrive after a cataclysm to teach humanity the arts of civilization. The Sumerians had the Apkallu, the Greeks had Prometheus, the Egyptians spoke of Thoth, and in Mesoamerica there was Quetzalcoatl. Could Göbekli Tepe be the physical echo of those myths, the place where such knowledge was reseeded into humanity after the world collapsed? Skeptics argue that we're reading too much into it. They say we should resist projecting modern meanings onto ancient symbols. Maybe the carvings are just animals, not constellations. Maybe the pillars were just meeting points, not cosmic calendars. But notice how often the official explanation relies on the word maybe. In reality, nobody knows for sure, and that's the chilling truth about Göbekli Tepe. It doesn't fit anywhere neatly. Too old for temples, too sophisticated for hunter-gatherers, too deliberately buried to be a simple shrine. Every explanation comes with gaps, contradictions, and unanswered questions. Take the labor problem. Even if we grant that hunter-gatherers could have carved and moved these stones, why would they? What motivation drives a non-agricultural society to devote generations of effort to building a site like this? If survival was their main concern, why invest so much in stone circles? Unless, of course, survival wasn't the only thing on their minds. Unless they were building not for necessity, but for memory, for legacy, or for something sacred that we can no longer comprehend. And then there's the question of scale. If only a small fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated, what else lies beneath the ground? Some estimates suggest the site could cover 22 acres. If true, that would make it larger than many later cities. Imagine what we might find if the rest were uncovered. More carvings, more alignments, maybe even written records in forms we don't yet recognize. Could Göbekli Tepe hold the key to rewriting not just a chapter of history, but the entire book? The most haunting idea of all is this. What if Göbekli Tepe isn't unique? What if it's just the one site we happen to find? If advanced, symbolic, monumental cultures existed 12,000 years ago, how many others were lost to time, washed away by floods, buried under deserts, or lying hidden beneath modern cities? Every ancient ruin we discover is like a flashlight beam in a vast, dark cave. The light falls on a small circle, but the shadows are endless, so we're left staring at these stones, buried for millennia, whispering across the ages. And the whispers say, "We were here long before you thought. We knew things you can't explain, and we wanted you to remember." Mainstream scholars will continue to argue for cautious interpretations. They'll say it was just a ritual gathering site, that the carvings are symbolic but not astronomical, that the burial was practical, not mysterious. But those explanations, as tidy as they sound, never quite silence the bigger questions. Because if people could build Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago, then civilization is older than we dare to admit. And if civilization is older, then history isn't a straight line, it's a cycle. One where knowledge rises, falls, and rises again. So maybe the real mystery isn't just who built Göbekli Tepe. Maybe it's what came before. And maybe the reason it was buried so carefully is because its builders wanted us to find it. Not too soon, not too late, but at the right moment in history, when we'd be ready to ask the right questions. And that leaves us with one final haunting thought. Does Göbekli Tepe preserve the echoes of a lost civilization, or are we staring at nothing more than a cartographic error in the story of time itself? Rohan Codex at first glance. The Rohan Codex might look like just another dusty old manuscript, the kind of thing you'd expect to find forgotten on a monastery shelf. But the moment you open it, you realize you're staring into one of the strangest enigmas in history. Page after page is filled with neat rows of mysterious symbols, almost 800 unique characters that no one has ever been able to read. Alongside the text are hundreds of illustrations, saints, soldiers, castles, even battle scenes. It looks like a book that should make sense. And yet, after centuries of study, the truth is, it doesn't. The Codex surfaced in Hungary during the 19th century, and since then it's baffled every linguist, historian, and cryptographer who's tried to crack it. Mainstream scholars argue over whether it's a medieval religious text, a prayer book, or something more esoteric. But the real problem is this: the symbols don't match any known alphabet, script, or language on Earth. It's not Latin, not Cyrillic, not Hungarian, not even related to obscure dialects. It's completely unique. And here's where things get even stranger. While most writing systems use a few dozen letters, the Rohan Codex uses nearly 800 distinct symbols. That's more than double what even the most complex alphabets require. So what is it? The conventional explanation is that the Codex is a hoax, a medieval prank, or perhaps a 19th century forgery designed to fool collectors. But here's where that theory collapses. The Codex is over 400 pages long. Creating such an elaborate fake, complete with intricate illustrations and a consistent system of symbols, would have taken years of painstaking effort. And for what? There's no record of anyone profiting from it, no evidence that it was ever sold as a valuable relic. If it was a hoax, it was one of the most elaborate hoaxes in history, and for absolutely no reward. That leaves us with the possibility that the Codex is genuine, that it's written in an unknown language, or perhaps a code meant to hide knowledge from prying eyes. But if that's true, then whose language was it? No culture or region has ever been identified with these symbols. It doesn't fit into Europe's linguistic map. It doesn't resemble Asian scripts. It doesn't match indigenous American languages either. It sits in a category of one, and the illustrations only deepen the mystery. Some scenes look biblical, depictions of Christ-like figures, crucifixions, halos around holy men. But others seem entirely secular: military battles, castles under siege, soldiers with swords. Why would a religious manuscript also contain depictions of warfare? Was it a chronicle, a coded history book disguised as scripture? Or did the artist simply merge two worlds, faith and power, in one hidden text? Cryptographers have tried every trick in the book to unlock its secrets. Frequency analysis, pattern recognition, comparisons with known languages. Nothing works. The text doesn't behave like normal writing. Some scholars think it might be an invented language, an artificial editor, code meant only for insiders. Others believe it could be a cipher alphabet, where the symbols stand for entire words or ideas instead of single letters. But if that's the case, then why use so many symbols? Why make it so needlessly complex? And then comes the eerie thought: what if the complexity was intentional? What if the codex wasn't meant to be read by the masses or even by anyone outside a specific group? Imagine a secret society preserving its teachings in a text that no outsider could ever decode. A language without a key is like a locked chest with no handle. Without context, it becomes a riddle written in stone. There's another theory that pushes the enigma into even darker territory, that the codex might represent a completely lost language, the last remnant of a people whose voice has been erased from history. Languages die all the time, swallowed by conquest and assimilation. But to find one preserved in a manuscript with symbols, rules, and illustrations intact would be extraordinary. It would mean the Rohan Codex isn't just a puzzle. It's a tombstone for an entire culture we never knew existed. Skeptics push back. They argue that the illustrations are too generic, that the script is too inconsistent, that it must be a forgery. But their explanations never fully hold. If it's a forgery, why the staggering length and detail? If it's a hoax, why the lack of motive? And if it's meaningless, then how has it managed to hold up under centuries of scrutiny without anyone conclusively debunking it? The codex sits in a strange limbo where neither side, authenticity or forgery, can prove its case, and that uncertainty is what makes it so haunting. You can stare at its pages for hours, watching rows of symbols march like soldiers across parchment, and still be no closer to understanding them. You can trace the illustrations with your finger and wonder what stories they once told. But the book remains stubbornly silent. Some researchers believe that with modern AI and cryptographic tools, the codex might one day give up its secrets. Others are less optimistic. They say, without a Rosetta Stone, a bilingual text to compare it to, we'll never truly know what it means. That leaves the Rohan Codex in a category all its own, a book that might contain scripture, history, prophecy, or nothing at all. And maybe that's why it continues to fascinate. Because when you hold it, you're not just holding a manuscript, you're holding the line between what we know and what we don't. It's a reminder that even in our hyper-digital age, with satellites mapping the Earth and AI scanning texts, some mysteries refuse to bow to human curiosity. So what exactly is the Rohan Codex? Was it the sacred language of a lost people? A coded history designed to hide dangerous truths? Or the most elaborate hoax ever committed to parchment? For now, it remains an undeciphered enigma, a book that speaks in a voice we cannot hear, holding secrets we may never unlock. The White Pyramid of China. If you've ever heard of the pyramids, chances are your mind goes straight to Egypt, the iconic stone giants lined up against the desert sky. But what if I told you there's another pyramid, one so massive it dwarfs the Great Pyramid of Giza, that almost no one talks about? Hidden away in the remote valleys of China, this structure has been whispered about for nearly a century, and yet even today it remains shrouded in secrecy. The first big clue came during the 1940s, when American pilots flying supply missions over China during World War II claimed to have seen it. One pilot, Colonel Maurice Sheehan, described a massive white structure rising from the landscape, surrounded by smaller pyramids. According to his account, the central pyramid was gigantic, perhaps 1,000 feet tall, making it far larger than anything in Egypt. His descriptions weren't vague either. He even claimed to have seen it glistening in the sunlight, its surface bright and almost reflective, like white stone or even polished metal. When he landed, he told people he had just flown over the greatest pyramid in the world. Newspapers picked up the story. For a brief moment, the world's attention flickered toward China, wondering what kind of ancient monument was hiding there. But then, almost as quickly, the story went quiet. No expeditions were mounted, no photographs confirmed the tale, and for decades the White Pyramid of China existed only in rumor. But why? Well, the answer may have less to do with archaeology and more to do with politics, because unlike Egypt, where ancient monuments are celebrated and displayed to the world, China has long been extremely protective of its ancient sites. In fact, in the Xi'an region, where the White Pyramid is said to be located, there are dozens, possibly hundreds, of pyramid-shaped mounds. These aren't natural hills. They're man-made burial mounds, some dating back more than 2,000 years. The Chinese government officially acknowledges many of these smaller pyramids as imperial tombs, belonging to emperors of dynasties long past. But the largest and most mysterious of them? Those are kept off-limits. Satellite images in recent years have confirmed the presence of pyramid-like structures scattered across the landscape near Xi'an. They're massive, geometric, and undeniably artificial. But when researchers and journalists have tried to get closer, they're met with restrictions. Some areas are fenced off, patrolled, or marked as military zones. The official explanation is that they're protecting the tombs from damage, or that excavation is unnecessary because the treasures are meant to remain buried forever. But skeptics can't help but wonder, what are they really hiding? Let's go back to those eyewitness reports. Sheehan wasn't the only one. Other pilots, missionaries, and travelers throughout the early 20th century described the same thing: a massive, shining pyramid, far larger than anything we're told exists in China. Some accounts even mention multiple pyramids lined up in formation, almost like a Chinese version of Giza's complex. Could it be that what they saw wasn't just another burial mound, but something altogether different, something so anomalous that it couldn't fit into the neat story of history? Here's where the contradictions begin. Official Chinese sources insist that no such enormous white pyramid exists, at least not in the sense described by those early witnesses. They admit there are pyramids in Xi'an, but claim they're simple earthen mounds, not shining stone giants. And sure, satellite images show what looks like giant hills covered in trees and grass. But what if that's the point? What if the so-called hills are actually ancient pyramids that have been deliberately covered with soil and vegetation to disguise them? Some researchers argue that what Sheehan saw in the 1940s was a pyramid still exposed, before decades of weathering vegetation and maybe even human intervention buried it from view. And then comes the strangest theory. What if it wasn't natural covering at all, but intentional concealment? Imagine an ancient structure, once gleaming and unmistakable, later hidden under tons of earth to erase it from memory. Who would have done it? And more importantly, why? The mainstream explanation is that the pyramids around Xi'an are imperial tombs, constructed as grand resting places for emperors and nobles of dynasties stretching back thousands of years. These tombs were often intentionally covered to look like hills, blending into the landscape as a sign of harmony with nature. That's why today they appear as giant mounds rather than sharp stone-faced pyramids like those in Egypt. But even if that's true, the scale described by Shihan is still a problem. At 1,000 feet tall, his White Pyramid would have been nearly twice the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Why would China hide such an achievement? Why let Egypt's monuments be celebrated, but keep their own hidden? That's where alternative theories come in. Some say the White Pyramid was never just a tomb, it was something else entirely. Perhaps a temple, a monument, or even a structure tied to knowledge far older than any dynasty. If so, that would explain why the government is so secretive, because admitting its existence might rewrite history itself. Others go even further, suggesting that the pyramid's size, reflective surface, and mysterious disappearance from public view could point to something truly extraordinary. Could it have been a relic of a lost civilization older than recorded Chinese history, or, if you want to stretch the imagination, could it even have been built with knowledge that didn't originate on Earth? Ancient astronaut theorists love the White Pyramid story, pointing out how it supposedly shined like metal, how it seemed impossibly large, and how quickly it was buried from sight. To them, it's not a burial mound at all, but a monument left behind by beings with technology beyond anything ancient humans were capable of. And yet, the frustrating part is that we can't confirm or deny any of it. Because despite modern technology, despite satellite images, despite global curiosity, access to these pyramids is still tightly controlled. Journalists who have tried to visit have been turned away. Archaeologists are forbidden to excavate. The official line is that disturbing the tombs would be disrespectful, but that explanation only adds fuel to the fire. After all, we excavate tombs and ruins all over the world. Why are these so untouchable? It leaves us with a chilling possibility. Maybe the secrecy isn't about protecting the past, but about controlling it. If the White Pyramid is real, and if it is as massive and unusual as the eyewitnesses claimed, then acknowledging it could force a rethinking of not just Chinese history, but human history as a whole. And maybe that's a truth some people would rather keep hidden. The deeper you dig into the White Pyramid story, the stranger it gets. Because eyewitness accounts didn't stop with Colonel Shehan in the 1940s. In fact, decades earlier, missionaries traveling through central China had recorded sightings of massive pyramid-like structures rising out of the plains. In 1912, one such traveler described a truly astonishing pyramid, pure white in color, towering above the landscape. He claimed it was accompanied by dozens of smaller ones, forming what looked like an ancient necropolis on a grand scale. These weren't casual mentions either. They were detailed descriptions, written with a tone of awe, as if the writers themselves couldn't quite believe what they had stumbled upon. So why is it that people could openly describe these pyramids in the early 20th century, but today we barely hear a word about them? One explanation is simple. In the early 1900s, the region was far less developed. The structures might have been visible in ways they're not anymore, before modern farming, reforestation projects, and military restrictions covered or obscured them. Another explanation, though, is less innocent, that the silence is intentional, that the closer outsiders got to investigating, the more those in power realized the implications. The Xi'an region is no ordinary piece of land. It's the heart of Chinese civilization, the cradle of dynasties that shaped Asia for millennia. If there are giant pyramids hidden there, larger than anything in Egypt, it would mean China once held the greatest architectural secrets in the ancient world. But what if those pyramids predated China itself? That would be even more explosive. Imagine structures standing in the heart of the country, so old and alien to recorded history that they couldn't be claimed by any dynasty. It would force the rewriting of not just Chinese history, but human history. And that might be something too destabilizing to allow. Let's talk about the theories. The mainstream one is straightforward. The so-called White Pyramid, and the many others like it, are simply burial mounds, imperial tombs built for China's emperors. They were designed to be sealed forever, never to be opened, as a way of preserving not only the body of the ruler, but their treasures, their secrets, even their supposed afterlife journey. This is why the Chinese government has repeatedly said they will not excavate these pyramids. Disturbing the dead is considered sacrilege, and the tradition insists the tombs are meant to remain untouched for eternity. That's a respectable explanation. But here's where the cracks begin to show, because not all of the tombs have been left sealed. We know this because some, like the famous tomb of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, the one guarded by the Terracotta Army, have been investigated, at least partially. Archaeologists discovered thousands of clay warriors, each unique, each painstakingly crafted. Ancient records claim the emperor's actual burial chamber is filled with rivers of mercury designed to mimic flowing water. Modern tests on the soil near the tomb show extremely high levels of mercury, suggesting those stories might actually be true. Yet the central chamber remains sealed. Why? The official reason is preservation. But skeptics argue that once again, the truth could be far stranger than we've been led to believe. Now apply that logic to the White Pyramid. If it exists at the scale described, gleaming white, taller than the Great Pyramid, wouldn't there be overwhelming incentive to investigate? The fact that it remains hidden raises uncomfortable questions. Could it be that the pyramid doesn't fit the story of Chinese civilization as neatly as an imperial tomb would? Could it belong to a period of prehistory that scholars can't account for? Then there's the extraterrestrial angle. This is the theory skeptics love to dismiss, but believers keep pointing back to. According to some fringe researchers, the White Pyramid wasn't just a tomb or a monument. It might have been built by, or with the help of, something beyond human. They argue that its reflective surface wasn't stone at all, but some kind of advanced material, maybe even metal. If that's true, then covering it with soil and vegetation might not just be natural erosion, but deliberate camouflage, a way to hide something we're not meant to see. It sounds wild, but consider the timing. Shihan saw the pyramid during World War II in a region few outsiders could access. After the war, the Cold War set in, and China became increasingly closed to the West. By the time satellite technology was widespread enough to look down on the region, many of the pyramid sites were already heavily forested. Coincidence? Or a carefully orchestrated effort to bury a piece of inconvenient history? Even more intriguing are claims that German expeditions before World War II had already visited the region. Some researchers suggest that Nazi explorers, obsessed with ancient mysteries and supposed lost civilizations, had knowledge of the White Pyramid and may have even taken photographs or records back to Europe. If true, those records are either buried deep in archives or lost to time. But the possibility alone adds another layer of secrecy to the story. So, what do we actually have today? We have eyewitness reports from missionaries, from pilots, from explorers. We have satellite images showing pyramid-shaped mounds, some of them enormous. We have government acknowledgement of many pyramids in the Xi'an region, but paired with strict restrictions on excavation. And we have one missing piece. The gleaming White Pyramid, described as the tallest of them all, seemingly vanished from sight. Was it ever real? Was it misidentified, just a trick of the light hitting a hillside? Or was it truly an ancient monument, larger than anything else on Earth, quietly hidden away to keep uncomfortable truths from surfacing? The frustrating part is that we may never know, and maybe that's the point. If the White Pyramid is an imperial tomb, sealing it forever serves tradition. If it's something more, a relic of a lost civilization or a monument whose builders can't be explained, then sealing it forever serves control. Either way, it remains locked away, untouched, and surrounded by mystery. Because here's the bottom line. If there really is a pyramid in China bigger than Giza's, then the entire narrative of ancient architecture changes. Suddenly, Egypt isn't the pinnacle of pyramid building. China is. And if China had the world's greatest pyramid builders, then where did they get that knowledge? How did they move such massive amounts of stone and material? And if they could do that, what else might they have been capable of? And so the White Pyramid remains not just a physical enigma, but a symbol of deliberate concealment, a reminder that history is only as complete as the stories we're allowed to hear. And somewhere out there, beneath layers of earth and secrecy, the truth is still waiting to challenge everything we think we know. Longyu Caves, China. Sometimes the most mind-bending discoveries don't come from a scientist or an archaeologist. They come from regular people just going about their lives. That's exactly what happened in 1992 in the small Chinese village of Longyu. Villagers were draining what they thought were just ordinary ponds, the kind their ancestors had fished from for generations. But when the water finally disappeared, what they uncovered was anything but ordinary. Beneath the surface lay the entrance to an enormous man-made cave, its walls carved with meticulous patterns. And not just one cave. Eventually 24 of them were revealed, each on a scale that seems almost impossible, even today. Picture this, a single cave stretching over 1,000 square meters, with ceilings up to 30 meters high. Every wall, every ceiling, every supporting pillar carved out of solid sandstone with remarkable precision. No rubble was left behind, no sign of discarded tools, no inscriptions saying who made them or why. And then multiply that by 24. To create just one of these caverns would have required removing hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of rock. To create them all would have meant excavating more material than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And yet, no one in history ever mentioned them. That's where the mystery begins. Because China isn't short on records. This is one of the most meticulously documented civilizations in the world. For thousands of years, dynasties carefully recorded their achievements. Roads built, battles fought, temples raised, even details as mundane as the taxes collected. Yet when it comes to the Longyu Caves, the chronicles are silent. No text, no story, not even a rumor about who carved them or what they were used for. It's as if an entire civilization-sized project happened, in total secrecy, and then was deliberately erased from memory, the conventional explanation. Some historians suggest the caves were ancient quarries, that maybe the stone had been mined for construction projects, and what we see today are simply the leftovers. On the surface, that might sound reasonable, but look closer and the idea begins to crumble. If these were quarries, why go to such lengths to carve the walls with intricate parallel lines, covering every surface with the same repeating pattern? Why leave behind massive supporting pillars, carefully shaped so that the caves would never collapse? And why are the caves so large, so symmetrical, and so carefully planned when a quarry's purpose is simply to remove stone as efficiently as possible? The contradictions keep piling up. First, there's the sheer manpower involved. To carve out just one cave would have required thousands of workers laboring around the clock for years. To complete all 24, that's an empire-sized project. Second, there's the absence of debris. By conservative estimates, the excavation would have produced more than 1 million cubic meters of stone. So where did it go? There are no records of massive stone dumps, no nearby structures built from it, no trace at all. It's as if the material vanished into thin air. And third, the caves have remained stable for over 2,000 years. Despite earthquakes, floods, and centuries of erosion, the walls stand firm, the ceilings uncollapsed. Whoever built them didn't just carve, they engineered. So what were they? One theory is that they were underground palaces, built for rulers or elites who wanted to hide from the world above. The grandeur, the scale, the symmetry, it all feels more ceremonial than practical. Another theory is that they were giant reservoirs, meant to store water for times of drought. But here's the problem. If they were reservoirs, why go to the trouble of carving elaborate patterns into the walls? Why waste the manpower, the energy, the artistry on something meant to just hold water? Some researchers suggest the caves could have been military bunkers, hidden strongholds where armies could regroup or protect themselves during times of war. The layout of the caves could theoretically support this. Broad chambers, interconnected, tunnels, defensible entrances. But again, why no mention in the detailed military records of Chinese dynasties? Wars were documented meticulously. If these were used for conflict, somebody, somewhere, would have written it down. And then, of course, comes the most controversial theory of all, that the caves were created using knowledge or technology we no longer possess. The patterns etched into the sandstone are strangely uniform, as though they were made by machines rather than hand tools. Each line runs parallel, smooth, unbroken, as if carved in one continuous motion. Experts have tried to replicate these markings with ancient chisels, but the results are sloppy and uneven by comparison. So how, thousands of years ago, did workers achieve perfection on such a massive scale? The deeper you go, the darker the questions get. If the caves were meant to be palaces, then whose palaces were they? No dynasty has claimed them. No royal family has connected their name to them. If they were reservoirs, then why is there no evidence they were ever filled with water? And if they were military, then why is the silence in the record so absolute? The idea of lost technology sounds outrageous, but when the other explanations fail, what's left? Could it be that the Longyu caves are relics of a forgotten civilization, one that rose and fell before the dynasties we know and left behind no trace except for these underground monuments? Adding to the mystery, the caves are not isolated. Satellite images show that the Longyu region is filled with dozens, maybe hundreds, of similar formations just waiting to be explored. Many remain flooded, untouched, and possibly hiding secrets even greater than the ones we've already seen. Yet exploration is slow, research is minimal, and the caves remain largely off the world's radar. For a discovery that should rewrite history books, they sit strangely ignored, and maybe that's the most unsettling part. If the Longyu caves had been found anywhere else, in Europe, in the Middle East, they'd be front-page news, studied endlessly, visited by millions. But here, in the heart of China, they're treated almost like an afterthought, a curiosity rather than a revelation. Could it be that their true story is simply too disruptive, that acknowledging them fully would force questions mainstream history doesn't want to face? Because here's the truth. Projects of this size don't just happen by accident. They require leadership, resources, technology, and purpose. And if we don't know who had those things in ancient China, then maybe it wasn't China at all. Maybe it was something older, something forgotten, something deliberately erased. So we're left with a haunting set of facts. 24 immense caves carved with impossible precision, with no records of their creation, no tools left behind, no debris to explain their excavation, and no explanation that fits neatly into our understanding of history. And the question that echoes louder than all the others: if they could do this, who were they, and why erase it? The Black Sarcophagus, Egypt. In the summer of 2018, construction workers in Alexandria, Egypt, stumbled onto something that instantly set the archaeological world buzzing. Beneath the ground, sealed under layers of stone, they uncovered a massive black sarcophagus, one of the largest ever found in Egypt. 3 meters long, weighing over 30 tons, carved from solid black granite. And here's the kicker. It hadn't been opened in more than 2,000 years. To put that in perspective, most sarcophagi we see from ancient Egypt are elaborately decorated, covered in hieroglyphics, built to celebrate the memory of whoever was inside. But this one, plain, stark, ominous, just a massive black box, sealed tight with no inscriptions, no markings, no clue about who or what might be inside. That's where the rumors started, because Egypt is no stranger to strange discoveries. Mummies have been found in golden coffins. Pyramids have been built with impossible precision. Tombs filled with curses have terrified explorers for centuries. But this sarcophagus was different. Bigger, heavier, darker. Immediately, theories swirled across the internet. Was this the lost tomb of Alexander the Great, whose burial site has never been found? Was it a long-forgotten pharaoh, erased from history? Or, as some suggested in hushed tones, was it even human? Mainstream archaeologists, of course, gave the standard explanation. They said it was just another burial, that the lack of inscriptions simply meant the individual buried here wasn't royal, maybe a wealthy noble or soldier, that the massive size was unusual, sure, but not impossible. They dismissed the wild theories as superstition and hype. But then came the moment of truth, opening the sarcophagus. And what happened next only made the mystery darker. When officials pried the lid open, a foul stench erupted from inside. The air had been sealed for centuries, and what it revealed shocked everyone. Instead of a single body, the sarcophagus contained a disgusting red-brown liquid, like sewage mixed with blood, and the partially decomposed remains of not one, but 3 individuals. The skeletons were twisted together in strange positions, as if they'd been thrown in carelessly, not carefully interred. And that stinking liquid? It wasn't embalming fluid. It wasn't anything archaeologists expected. Tests later suggested it was mostly sewage that had seeped in. But how could sewage infiltrate a sealed 30-ton granite coffin buried deep underground? The contradictions didn't stop there. For one, why go to the trouble of carving such an enormous sarcophagus out of solid black granite, hauling it from distant quarries and sealing it with precision, only to dump 3 random bodies inside with no care, no inscriptions, no ritual? Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. Every burial was meticulous, symbolic, sacred. But here, we have something closer to a mass grave shoved inside, one of the most impressive coffins ever made. It doesn't add up. Another problem, the skeletons didn't match the coffin's grandeur. At least one belonged to a soldier based on traces of arrow damage to the skull, but the other 2, unclear. No golden masks, no royal jewelry, no sign of wealth or status, just bones, decaying in red sludge. If this was meant to honor a pharaoh or noble, where's the glory? And if it wasn't, why build such an enormous coffin at all? That's where alternative theories take over. Some believe the sarcophagus wasn't meant as a coffin at all, but as a prison, that the bodies inside weren't honored, but condemned, sealed away in black granite to keep something dangerous trapped forever. The sewage-like fluid could have been the result of ancient rituals gone wrong, or even part of an attempt to drown the evil sealed inside. Others have gone even further, suggesting extraterrestrial connections, that the black granite box wasn't burial at all, but some kind of containment chamber designed to withstand incredible forces or energies we don't understand. After all, similar granite boxes exist in places like Serapeum of Saqqara, massive stone sarcophagi too large for practical burials, leading some to suspect they served an entirely different purpose. And then there's the Alexander the Great theory. For centuries, historians have searched for his tomb. We know he died in Babylon in 323 BCE, and his body was supposedly transported to Egypt. But after that, the trail goes cold. Some argue the black sarcophagus fits the bill, enormous, mysterious, hidden. But if Alexander was inside, where are the treasures? Where's the evidence? Surely his followers wouldn't dump him in sewage and seal him with no markings, unless the goal was to erase him from memory entirely. The strangest part, though, might be the reaction after the opening. The discovery made global headlines, but the story fizzled quickly. Officials rushed to explain away the anomalies. The sludge was sewage, the bodies just locals, the sarcophagus nothing special. But many weren't convinced. The sheer scale, the eerie presentation, the contradictions, something about it felt off, as if the truth was being downplayed. Even the way the skeletons were arranged, jumbled and disrespected, seemed deliberately hidden under layers of official explanation. And of course, the internet latched onto it. Some joked about drinking the mummy juice for eternal life, while others warned of ancient curses being unleashed. But beneath the memes was a genuine unease. Why build something so monumental, only to fill it with such a disturbing mess? Because here's the thing, the ancient Egyptians didn't do random. Everything they built, from the pyramids to the smallest tomb, had meaning, precision, symbolism. Yet this sarcophagus defies that logic. It's too big, too carefully made, too deliberately sealed to be meaningless. And yet, the contents suggest the opposite: careless, sloppy, disrespectful. It's a contradiction that mainstream explanations can't fully resolve. So we're left with questions. Was the black sarcophagus really just a strange burial, or was it something else entirely? A prison, a ritual, a secret meant to stay buried? Were the three bodies dumped inside to hide them, to curse them, or to protect the world from whatever they represented? And perhaps most chilling of all, if this was just one discovery, hidden under the streets of Alexandria, how many more secrets are buried in Egypt, waiting for us to stumble upon them? The mystery remains sealed in stone. The Antikythera mechanism, Greece. In 1901, off the coast of a tiny Greek island called Antikythera, sponge divers stumbled onto what looked like just another ancient shipwreck. Scattered across the seabed were statues, pottery, coins, typical treasures of a sunken cargo ship. But buried in the debris, covered in rust and coral, was something completely unexpected. A lump of bronze and wood that didn't look like much at first. It seemed broken, corroded, unremarkable. But once scientists began to study it, they realized they were staring at something that shouldn't exist. That lump was actually a machine, now known as the Antikythera mechanism, and not just any machine. Inside its corroded fragments are dozens of bronze gears, cogs and wheels, all intricately arranged with teeth so precise they could rival a modern clock. Reconstructed, it looks like a kind of ancient computer, built over 2,000 years ago. And here's the twist. Nothing else even close to this level of technology shows up in the historical record for another 1,000 years. So what exactly did it do? Mainstream scholars say the Antikythera mechanism was used to predict astronomical events. By turning a hand crank, the gears would rotate and display the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. It could predict solar eclipses, chart the movement of the heavens, and even keep track of complex cycles like the timing of the Olympic Games. Think about that for a second. Over 2,000 years ago, someone built a mechanical computer with dozens of precision-cut gears to track the cosmos. And yet, according to our history books, ancient Greece didn't have the tools, the machines, or even the mindset to pull this off. That's where the contradictions begin. If the Greeks really made this, why don't we find dozens of them? Why has only one ever turned up, pulled out of the sea by accident? We've uncovered thousands of temples, statues, coins, and scrolls from that era, but not a single workshop, blueprint, or reference to machines like this. The Antikythera mechanism seems to appear out of nowhere, fully formed, as if someone dropped advanced technology into a world that wasn't supposed to have it. And it's not just the existence of the device, it's the level of precision. The teeth of its gears were cut so finely that even with modern tools, it would take a skilled craftsman to replicate them. The ratios between the gears perfectly align with complex astronomical cycles, calculations so advanced that most people today would struggle to work them out without a computer. How could an ancient culture, supposedly working with hammers, chisels, and basic bronze tools, create something so sophisticated? Some argue the Greeks had a whole tradition of mechanical engineering that we've simply lost. Maybe the Antikythera mechanism was just one of many devices, and the rest were destroyed by war, decay, or the selective preservation of history. Others say it points to a deeper problem with our timeline of technology, that ancient civilizations were far more advanced than we give them credit for, and that we've been underestimating their knowledge for centuries. But the darker theories go even further. There are whispers that the mechanism isn't Greek at all, that it might have been inherited knowledge, passed down from an earlier forgotten civilization, a culture that mastered astronomy and mechanics long before recorded history. Some even suggest that the Antikythera mechanism could be evidence of contact with advanced beings, extraterrestrial or otherwise, who gifted knowledge far beyond the capabilities of the time. After all, why else would a single, isolated device of this complexity appear in a world that otherwise lacked the means to produce it? And then there's the unsettling possibility. Maybe the device wasn't rare. Maybe ancient societies had more machines like this, clocks, computers, devices for navigation, even engines, and we just haven't found them yet. Think about it. If bronze and wood were the main materials, most of it would have rotted or corroded away centuries ago. What if the Antikythera mechanism is just the tip of the iceberg, a lone survivor of a lost technological age erased by time? To make matters even stranger, every attempt to fully reconstruct the mechanism has revealed more complexity. Advanced imaging shows hidden inscriptions, tiny engravings describing cycles of the stars, mathematical calculations, and instructions so precise they could have only been written by someone with immense astronomical knowledge. In other words, whoever built this didn't just know how to shape metal. They understood the universe on a level that seems centuries ahead of its time. And that brings us back to the central question. If they could build this, what else were they capable of? Was ancient Greece, or perhaps an even older culture, on the verge of an industrial revolution before history abruptly reset? Or was the Antikythera mechanism a one-off, a strange miracle of ingenuity that should never have existed at all? The truth is, nobody knows. The mechanism sits today in a museum in Athens, locked behind glass, its corroded gears still holding secrets we can't fully unlock. Scholars will tell you it was an astronomical calculator. The curious will whisper about lost civilizations and hidden knowledge, and conspiracy theorists will point to it as evidence of something far stranger, that humanity's story isn't nearly as simple as we've been taught. One thing is certain: the Antikythera mechanism doesn't fit neatly into our history books. It's a machine that shouldn't exist, a puzzle from the deep that continues to defy explanation. So we're left with the haunting question: is it just a relic of forgotten Greek genius, or an echo of a far older, far stranger world that time tried but failed to erase? When you step back and look at all these stories together, it makes you realize just how little we actually know about our own past. History books give us neat timelines and simple answers, but the world doesn't always fit into neat boxes. From stones heavier than skyscrapers to maps of places we weren't supposed to know about, from undeciphered texts to machines that shouldn't exist, the truth is full of gaps, and those gaps are filled with mysteries that challenge everything we think we know. And maybe that's the most important lesson. The past isn't settled, and the more we uncover, the stranger it gets. If these ancient people could build the impossible, hide secrets in plain sight, and maybe even preserve knowledge we've forgotten, then what else is still out there waiting to be discovered? Thanks for watching, and if you love diving into the strange corners of history as much as I do, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next mystery. Drop a comment with which of these baffled you the most, and let's keep the conversation going. Because the deeper we look into the past, the more it feels like we've only scratched the surface, and the biggest secrets may still be hiding right beneath our feet.